So today I'm going to talk to you about ant control and different methods and strategies that we can use to control ants with focus on speed of control. So I'm going to give you provide some introductory information on ants. So for those of you who are very experienced, please bear with me. But I'll assure you, it will get more complex in advance. So you just need to wait a little bit. So I do that because, I want to make sure everyone is on the same page, especially newcomers, people who just joined, started pest control. All right, introduction to ants. So I'm sure all of you are familiar to some extent, or maybe some of you are very familiar with ants. And so generally speaking, like many other insects, they have head, thorax, and abdomen. We use different terminology for referring to different parts of their body, like mesosoma, and then they have this pedicle, or kind of like a waist, right? And it could be a one segmented, two segmented, and then the abdomen is called metosoma, and especially if you look at ant identification keys. Okay, so they have elbowed antennae, almost all ants have that. And then they have metapleural glands, which are unique to ants, and they're responsible for producing antifungus, antifungi, and antibiotic fluids. Because if you can imagine inside a nest, usually inside the soil, the humidity is high, and any type of fungus and bacteria can grow there and kill ants. So these glands help to produce that antibacterial, antifungi material to kind of protect the nest against these microorganisms. And I mentioned the waste. So for those of you who recently joined pest control, usually, usually the general public, makes this mistake, but it doesn't hurt to review. So most of the termites, when you see them in the field, they have like a light tan, light colored body versus ants, which can be anything from red to yellow, orange, red to brown or black. So one way to distinguish them is the waist that ants have. And of course, termites don't have it. And then the second one is the elbowed antennae, which you can see in ants, but you don't see that in termites. And yes, so for the alate or winged individual swarmers, another way to distinguish that is that ants have the front and back wings have different sizes, but in termites they're more similar in size. Okay. Because of the waste that ants have, they are restricted on what they can eat, what they can feed on. So there's some major implications of having such a narrow waist for ants. And it means that they cannot really digest large particles, solid particles. So they need to really chew on stuff, and they can only pass tiny particles into their stomach. So when they feed on larger stuff, they're usually dependent on late stage larvae in the nest to break down and digest the material. So anytime they gather solid food, they bring it back to the nest, they feed it to the larvae, especially the later stage larvae, which have larger mandibles, and they chew on stuff and they feed on it, and then they regurgitate a fluid made out of like enzymes and the food particles. And then that's when most of the worker ants can feed on this stuff. So they cannot feed on larger stuff. So this is very important in ants biology and also in ant control, because again, adult worker ants cannot feed on solid food for the most part. They can take it back to the nest. You see them do that, but it doesn't mean that they can actually feed on and digest that material. Okay, so problems that ants cause, it can be anything from nuisance to causing problems in the landscape, go after aphids, tending aphids, psyllids, like in the case of for example, Asian citrus psyllid. It's a big deal. The more ants you have, the more protection those pests in the landscape get against parasitoids, against lady beetles, and other natural enemies. So by disrupting that relationship or mutualism, we can do a better job in controlling the landscape pests too. Okay, and then some ants sting, like fire ants, and of course when they get inside homes, that's when they enter the structural pest control kind of like realm, and they invade food sources. They get into pantry, into kitchen, or other places, and also some of them can damage structural wood, like carpenter ants, right? So here are some examples. I'm sure you're familiar, especially people from Southern California to south, from here, California to Florida. In many places, you have fire ants. I mean, red important fire ants. The native fire ant that we deal with everywhere pretty much is the southern fire ants, which look very similar, but if you look under microscope, the front of the head, the clypeus, has like two kind of like projections versus red important fire ants that have three projections in the front of the head. Anyhow, but many ants can sting. Harvester ants can sting, and that's actually very painful. Big-headed ants, and of course, the red important fire ants and southern fire ants and many other fire ants, they can sting. And it can be really problematic for school children because, they're usually on the ground, either sitting, or they fall down a lot. And if they hit a mound or so, then it could be a big problem. So different ant species build nests in different places, right? Sometimes, most of the time, they're in the soil, right? Like the fire ants, the Argentine ants, many other ones. But sometimes, they get into structure. They can build nests inside walls, like the odorous house ant, ghost ants, if you're familiar. When I was living in Florida, we used to have ghost ants all the time inside the house, and it was so difficult to control them. So that's what they do. Sometimes, they can get inside the structure and have their main part of the nest above the ground. So these pests, these ants with this ability, are a good candidate to become structural pests, because if you have to be in the soil, if you have to have your nest in the soil, then you can't really reside inside the structure above the ground. But if you can do that, then that opens a lot of doors to you. I mean, to an ant species I'm talking about. And then sometimes they get into wood, like carpenter ants. We have velvety tree ants. They can get, similar to termites, they can get into studs, rafters, door frames, and you name it. And the ones that are more dependent on moisture, you see them in forests, feeding on fallen trees and logs and stuff like that. So they can be small or big. So the smallest one that I've dealt with is the ghost ant and rover ants. Those are the smallest one. And I believe the largest ones that I deal with are the carpenter ants. They're, in my region at least, in urban areas, those are the larger ones. So I mentioned the waste and having one node or two nodes. This is a very good way of classifying ants. And so sometimes, like the top picture, if you look, you only see one node, but sometimes the node is hidden under the abdomen, because the abdomen is folding forward, and then the let's say this is the node, it covers the node. So sometimes you have to, you know, like kill an ant, or like just collect it, and then you know, just using some sort of like a forceps or like a pin to remove the abdomen or move it back to be able to see the node. So just be aware of that. And some ants have two nodes. The interesting thing is that all the stinging ants, that have stingers, have two nodes on their waist. So if you see an ant with one node, it means that they cannot sting. Yeah, and usually they have other mechanisms for defense. It's a chemical defense. For stinger ants, it's also a chemical defense. But for other ones, you know, with one node, they usually spray stuff on their enemy or when they get disturbed, but they don't sting other ants or animals. So Argentine ant is an example of an ant with one node that doesn't sting. And of course, fire ants and big-headed ants and pharaoh ants and little fire ant and many other ones, they can sting. So in pest control, what really matters is the role of different ants in the colony, or caste. You know, caste means a group of individuals within a colony which do a certain task. So you have a queen or queens, depending on the colony, because some colonies have multiple queens, and they're in charge of reproduction and starting a colony. And then you have males, which are temporary. You know, you see them at a certain point, time of the year, and then they come out, they swarm, and they mate, but either they die shortly after or they get executed by workers. So they're temporary, and this is similar to like honeybees and other ones. So males are in the colony just for a short period of time. And then you have the workers, of course, and sometimes you have major workers, you know, which sometimes called soldiers. But some ant species don't have that. Like the Argentine ants, there's no soldier caste, there's no major worker. They're all about the same size. They can have a different color, as I mentioned. So it could be like, they could be bicolored, you know, the front and the head and the thorax could be lighter, and then the abdomen darker, and anything from yellow to brown, you know, kind of like a reddish brown and dark brown and black. So colony size could be very small to a few, you know, from a few hundred individuals to millions of individuals, depending on the species and depending on the age of the colony. And in the later slides, I'll talk about the importance of colony size in management. So yeah, so colony size can affect how ants forage or defend the nest and other things. So for example, smaller colonies, they forage shorter distances. So this has been shown by research. So like, for example, fire ants, if you have an incipient colony, a small colony, they're not gonna forage like 30, 40 feet. They're going to just forage, you know, 5 feet, you know. But if you have a mature colony, a large colony, they can easily forage up to 50, 60, or even more feet from the main part of the nest. So they have pheromones, obviously, right? That's how ants find food. So they go kind of like randomly around, and then as soon as they find a good source of food, they start laying down a trail and invite other members and recruit other members of the colony to come and feed on the actual food source. So some other ant species can eavesdrop on the trails produced by other species. So they can know that, you know what, these Argentine ants are up to something, they found food, so let's follow the trail and, you know, feed on the same source of food, and sometimes they're successful. So they also produce alarm pheromones, when they're in danger, that invites other ones to come and join to defend the colony and push out an intruder that is trying to come into a nest. So as I mentioned, they form this mutualistic relationship with hemipterans. So anything from scales, scale insects, soft scale insects, aphids, mealybugs, and psyllids. They also make a relationship, like have a similar relationship with whiteflies. But the thing with whiteflies is that they don't just drop the honeydew from where they are feeding on the plant, but they kind of like throw it out, like catapult it, to a distance, so that's why you don't see, when you have whiteflies, let's say on a top leaf, you don't see the accumulations, honeydew and sooty mold right beneath of that leaf. Usually see it, on the sides, and that's because they don't just drop it. They just, throw it out, they just catapult it, with high speed. So that's the twist for whiteflies. And so I already mentioned, that they protect pests against natural enemies. So most ants are omnivores, meaning that they feed on a lot of stuff. They can prey on some worms and larvae, but they're also scavengers, and they feed on plants too, on seeds and other parts of the plants that you can see here. So some examples, leafcutter ants, they feed on a fungus that they grow inside their nests on leaves. And generally speaking, we divide ants into sweet feeders and grease or protein feeders. So fire ants, for example, are grease, oil, or protein feeders, and Argentine ants are sweet feeders. It doesn't mean that they won't feed on the other category, like fire ants take sugary water and sweet stuff fine, but when you give them the option, they always, or most of the time, go after the greasy stuff. And the same applies to Argentine ants. So the feeding behavior may change in some ants. So in some, like in the spring, some ant species go mostly after protein-rich food because they're reproducing and they have a lot of larvae to feed, and that requires a lot of protein. But when you go into the summertime, then they switch to sweet stuff. So in some species, the change is very drastic. Like it's kind of like they reject the other type of food. Like in the springtime, some ants really don't show much interest to sweet stuff. And in the summertime, the opposite. But in some other species, it's not necessarily that drastic, but still happens. Like even Argentine ants, they have this seasonal thing. So in the spring, they go more after protein stuff, and then sweet stuff in the summertime. So queens, develop similar to workers, but then they feed more, and that's how it works for honeybees too. And so workers are sterile females, so they can reproduce for the most part. Some species they can, it's a complex kind of biology there. But for the most part, they can't lay eggs, they can reproduce, but they can work and defend the colony or sting and stuff like that. All right, so now I'm going to talk about some advanced stuff. Okay, let's get into management. So for ants, obviously, there are many ways to control them. Usually we go with chemical control, anything, from liquid insecticide, dust, or bait. But we also have non-chemical methods, which I'm not going to cover much today, except one. Mechanical removal of the nest, cultural control, when you have a landscaping around. In agricultural fields, mulching can really slow down movement of ants. And exclusion and sanitation, which are important, but again, I'm not going to cover, and sometimes they're really difficult to do. So fast or slow, that's the main focus of my talk. So When it comes to ant control or any other pest, really, we can choose different methods, right? We can use different chemicals. We can use some non-chemical methods. But usually, we can divide them into fast and slow control. Okay, so for example, if you can remove a nest of an ant species, then you're quickly removing a lot of the individuals, a lot of the workers and other casts, from a property or from a location, and you can quickly kind of like do a good job in getting rid of the pest, right? Or when you use chemical control, if you use neurotoxins, like pyrethroids, neonicotinoids, those are fast-acting insecticides that affect nervous system. And that's why they're fast, they quickly disrupt the function of the nervous system. But sometimes, so these are really appreciated by customers, right? Because you're taking care of the problem quickly, and it's much easier to explain what you did, why you did it, because it works very fast, so everyone is happy. But sometimes there could be some potential disadvantages. When you do choose a slower acting chemical, for example, like an IGR, or you use a low dose boric acid or something like that, then you're not going to get that fast action, right? And usually it's less appreciated by clients in short term, right? Unless you explain to them why you're doing this, or sometimes when sometimes clients want you to use a specific method or chemical because they're concerned about A, B, C, D, right? But there could be some potential advantages to that. So let's talk about faster methods. So nest removal. Sometimes ants come from the roof. You have tree branches touching the roof, and then you have a lot of leaf litter accumulated, on the roof, and that's when like for example, in the case of Argentine ants, toward the end of summer, all of a sudden, thousands and thousands of ants can find their way inside the house and can invade the house, and it can cause a big problem. So in this cases like this, removing all this leaf litter can do really great, can really take care of the problem very quickly, right? Because if you don't, you're going to have many ants on the roof somewhere, and it will take time, if you want to use chemical control. So it really makes sense sometimes to do physically removing a nest or part of the nest if possible. But it's unfortunately rarely possible, because you don't always have situations like this. And if they're in the soil, you have to dig really deep to get rid of the nest. So when you use faster methods, for example, use bifenthrin, or chemicals like that, you can kill foragers very quickly. And I emphasize here foragers, not the rest of the colony. Okay, it could be anything from a few hours to 1-2 days, and then they're gone. So that's really good, keeps customer happy, and I have nothing against it. It's very good. Customers, really appreciate it initially, and I'll talk about what may happen later, if they come back. So that would be a problem. But initially, everyone is happy, and you can really, the good thing about using these fast-acting pesticide is that you can quickly reduce pest pressure. So pest pressure means that like the number of pests that you have around, if you have a huge Argentine ant colony or fire ant colonies around the house, and it's really difficult to do a good job controlling them if you don't knock it down, knock down the population. Because when you have too many, sooner or later they'll find another way of getting into a structure, or if it's on the lawn, they'll find a way, they'll sting people, shortly. There will be another incidents very soon. So this is really great about using fast acting methods. And it also, using fast or slow methods, is also dependent on the contract types, that you have. If you're just doing incidental treatment, somebody called and you're going there and there's no like a recurring service or like a annual contract, then you're limited on what you can do. And it only makes sense to use a fast acting method, to get rid of the problem and keep the customer happy, and then go to the next side, right? But if you have a recurring service, you have a contract, long-term contract, then you can think of using other methods, or combine a fast-acting method with a slow-acting method for larger impact on the population. Fire ants are a good example on this. So if you use fast-acting methods, there are some products, like if you spray, for example, I mean, you're not going to get good results in the long term, right? And then the fire ants will come back very quickly. And this is not ideal, in the long term. But if you use slower acting active ingredients, which I'm going to talk in later slides, then the customer needs to wait a little bit, but then the results are much better. The long-term results are much more successful. Better control, yes. All right, so before talking about the speed, other aspects of the speed of control, I'm just going to provide some very interesting facts about the biology of ants, and then go back to the topic of the speed. So in any given colony, ant colony, only small percentage of the workers or the whole colony actually forage. So usually it's under 20%. Okay, this is very interesting and important. So for example, a study on harvester ants showed that only 7 to 15% of the colony actually forages. The rest of the colony, they don't forage. They're usually back in the nest doing other tasks. Another study, found something even more interesting. So they found that not only a small percentage, around 10% of the colony forage, but also they found that 40% of the colony was inactive, doing nothing, okay, idle. So not so hardworking, right? So 40% of the colony, they found that you see these colorations, this marking that they put on individual ants, and I really wonder how they did that because it's so difficult to do. But anyhow, they watch ants inside the colony very carefully, and then they mark them, and they realize that the 40% of the colony is doing nothing. So they don't forage, they don't take care of the brood, they don't clean, they don't feed on anything, they don't exchange food with others, absolutely nothing. So after studying that, they realized that these inactive ants are served as a reserve labor force. Okay, so they intentionally remove some of the active foragers, remove more and more and more to see what happens. And then what they saw was that these inactive idle workers all of a sudden become recruited. They start foraging. So they're there ready to be called. And as soon as there's a need, they start working. Okay. So the larger the colony get, probably they can have a larger reserve labor force. And this is very interesting, but just pay attention to the percentages. Only a small percentage of a colony actually forages. So there's another fact, necrophoresis, which means carrying dead bodies. So ants, termites, bees, and wasps, all of them do that. So when they see a dead individual inside the colony, a dead colony mate, they quickly remove it from the colony to prevent spreading diseases and stuff like that, okay? So you can see here, this ant is moving stuff, and then there's an Argentine ant in the lower picture moving a dead colony mate out of the colony. So this is an important behavior in ant control. And they also make these graveyards. So if you look at the nests of Argentine ants and fire ants, when especially when you do a treatment, sometimes, 1, 2 days, or sometimes 1 week later, you come back and you see a pile of dead ants right next to the entrance of the nest, and you see more ants bringing these dead bodies and just pile them, in graveyards. So that's what they do. They just want to quickly get rid of these dead bodies because it's a sanitation practice. Then you have another interesting fact in ants is that anytime you do a treatment, you have this phenomenon called horizontal transfer, and it comes from public health. So in public health, disease transmission, you have vertical transmission when, for example, a mother passes a disease to her child, like Zika, and then you have this horizontal transfer, like me passing flu, or somebody passes flu to me because, we just shook hands or we saw each other somewhere. So in ants, in pest control, we have this horizontal transfer phenomenon, which occurs when an ant gets exposed to a pesticide, either by feeding on a bait or by just passing over a treated surface, and then they come back to the nest, and then they exchange food, like this animated GIF that is showing trophallaxis, or me exchanging food, or they just touch each other, like with their antennae, groom each other, and that's how they pass the active ingredients to other members of the colony. Okay, so you can see the types here. It could be like a mouth-to-mouth trophallaxis, or it could be a contact that causes this transfer. And this is very important because the more transfer you have, the larger impact you can make on the colony, the larger the insecticide treatment will be. Let me check the time. Okay, so slower chemical control means that there's a higher chance of horizontal transfer. If you kill your ants very quickly, they don't have, you're not giving them the chance to maximize their contact with colony members, or exchanging food, maximizing their food exchange with other members of the colony, okay? But when you use a slow acting product, then you're giving them the chance to do that. And different active ingredients have different inherent properties on or potential to get transferred. For example, one study showed that fipronil has a very, very high transfer rates compared to bifenthrin and beta-cyfluthrin. Okay, so it means that anytime you apply fipronil, it's much more likely that ants will pass it to, or like simply, ants will pass it to more individuals compared to other ones. So other ones have it, but some active ingredients have a higher capacity to get transferred or moved between individuals. And another interesting aspect about this study is that they found that it doesn't matter if you provide live or dead ants inside a nest to check the horizontal transfer. Both of them cause similar amount of mortality, suggesting that when you put dead ants inside the colony, or when ants feed on something or get exposed and go back and die inside a nest, the behavior that I just mentioned, necrophoresis, is responsible for the transfer of the pesticide. So when they see a dead ant, they quickly want to take it out and remove it from the nest. And during that process, because they have to carry it with their mouth parts, with their antennae, they get also exposed to the pesticide. So that's the beauty of it, because the ants that go back, they don't have to stay live. It's okay if they died inside the nest, and they're still going to pass the insecticide to other colony mates. Another interesting factor is the colony size. So the larger the colony gets, the larger amount of pesticide is needed to destroy that colony or to make it collapse. Okay, so when ants feed on a bait or get exposed to an insecticide, we call these ants donor ants. So they're going to get exposed to the pesticide, and they're going to bring the material on their body or in their mouth, if they fed on a bait, and pass it to other ones. So when you have a large colony, you need to have more of these ants, take the material, go back and pass it to others. So if you look at this graph, It's not the simplest graph, but I'll try to make it as simple as I can. So if you look at the red box on left, this is the experiment in which they released 10 donor ants inside a 100 among 100 individuals of ants. Okay, so a very small colony. As you can see, around I think 90% of the recipients, other colony mates which did not directly get exposed to the pesticide, tested positive for the active ingredient, meaning that the donor ones, the 10 donor ants, they passed the this is a bait study. They did food exchange with others, and then they passed the chemical. So most of them tested positive. But if you look at the right red box on the very right of the graph, you can see that the same 10 donor ants, when they were placed among 1,000 ants, you can see that the dilution effect here caused around 45%, less than 50% of the ants recipient ants testing positive for the chemical, meaning that the chemical got diluted and it could not be traced in a lot of the ants in the larger colony. Okay, so as more and more colony exchange food, yes, so the pesticide gets diluted basically. So now let's connect the dots. Okay, most of the worker ants don't forage, but can be recruited when foragers die, current foragers die. So less than 20%, usually much less than that, maybe 10%, 15%. But the key here is that dead workers can be replaced by inactive workers. Okay, so given time, a slow-acting insecticide can kill a higher percentage of a colony compared to a fast-acting insecticide due to higher horizontal transfer rates, okay? And also necrophoresis, plays an important role because when they move out the dead bodies, that's when they get exposed to the pesticide. And then the last one that I just mentioned, ingested insecticide get diluted in the nest as more food exchange happens. So in theory, you need more and more donor ants to pass the material to other members of the colony. So control speed and colony elimination. So sometimes, actually many times, we don't necessarily want to eliminate or eradicate a colony. I mean, this is ideal, but I'm telling you, in the field, that rarely happens. Even when we don't see any foragers after application, and we assume that we have killed the whole colony, but in reality, we have just killed the foragers or maybe a portion of a good portion of the ants and workers and soldiers and whatever inside the colony, but the queen is still alive underground, and we don't have a way to tell, to detect that. But so anyhow, so many times, maybe killing foragers is enough. You just want to quickly get rid of the problem, and I have nothing against that. That's actually good. But if you want to make a larger impact, then it's better to go with slower acting products, and I'm going to I'll talk about those products. So as I mentioned, products which have neurotoxic properties, they act fast. Anything, all the pyrethroids, all the neonicotinoids, these are all, and indoxacarb, these are all neurotoxins and affect nervous system, and that's why they act faster. But then if you look at the products that disrupt metabolism of insects, those work slower because it takes time for these material to kind of like disrupt the energy production, and then usually insects have a reserve of energy molecules, and then so it takes a little bit more time. And then the slowest ones are insect growth regulators. Okay, and you can see some examples here. Neurotoxins, I'm talking about baits here for fire ants, like Advion, for example, has indoxacarb. It takes 2 to 7 days to kill, and then energy disruptors 2 to 6 weeks, and IGRs are the slowest here, taking 6 to 8 weeks. So you need to really make sure that using IGR is practical. It works great in the long run, but in short term, it's not a good option necessarily. So ideal insecticides for short-term control are fast-acting, could be repellent or non-repellent, okay? For long-term, you need to go with slow to moderate speed, products that have that speed to get higher transfer rates and stuff like that. Insect growth regulators are designed to slowly destroy entire colony by disrupting reproduction, either reducing egg production or disrupting molting, right? And yeah, so they usually start kicking in when the next generation of adults are get screwed up, basically, because they can't develop into normal adults. And another thing to mention is repellency or deterrency or deterrence. So repellency refers to the fact that, some insecticides, like most pyrethroids, they kind of like repel insects. They know what something is going on. But repellency doesn't happen immediately, meaning that when you treat a concrete surface, for example, and then you have ants coming in, they're going to cross that spray. They're going to cross that treatment a few times sometimes. And in the process, some of them die or many of them die. But then after some time, they realize that, there's something wrong here. Let's avoid that. So, and it's very good if you want to keep pests away from the structure. You need to use the right product. So I mentioned, most pyrethroids, and then you have non-repellent insecticides that are designed to kill, to maximize kill, because insects have no idea what's going on. They cross over the material and then die. However, just a word of caution, if you use too much or use a high concentration of these insecticides, they can show repellency too. Okay, so here's a study showing that when you use higher concentration of fipronil, you can get repellency in termites. Okay, so and it applies to all other groups. So to repel or not to repel, sometimes I hear people saying that, oh, it's better not to repel. Let's use non-repellent stuff. So sometimes that might be true, but other times repellency is actually good, is beneficial, keeps bugs out of an area, especially when you don't care what's happening outside the area of treatment. You can have millions of cockroaches, away in the sewer system, and as long as they don't come in, that's okay. The same with ants. But other times, if you want to kill maximize kill, maybe using a non-repellent insecticide is better, because they don't know what's going on and they cross over the treated surface and they die. And so hopefully you'll kill a much larger portion of the colony. But it's up to you. I'm not here to judge. So just quickly, because I don't have much time, eradication versus knockdown versus management and repelling. Okay, so eradication, this is a confusing term, but I like to use it when we're trying to kill or remove all the colonies of a species from a larger area, from a city, from a larger area. That's when I would recommend using eradication. And knockdown means simply when you want to really hit the population, the infestation hard, so that you can do other stuff, and it's to get a relief from the pest pressure. Then you have management, which again is a confusing term. Different people use it in very different ways, but I like to use the word management when we're trying to reduce population, not necessarily something extreme or like eradication, but just trying to control and keep it keep the infestations, the pressure low, small. And then repelling. So repelling, what happens is that you apply like this red circle around the treated area. Some ants keep passing or crossing your treatment band, and some of them die, and some of them just avoid. And after some time, what happens is that the whole infestation, stops coming into the treated area, right? So it also reduces pressure, not necessarily by maximizing killing, but by keeping them out. Okay, nest versus aggregation site. Sometimes people call like cockroach nest, and I don't like that, so I just wanted to mention here. So nest, I would call nest something that is built by insects, not just like a harborage. So dose dependency, again, some products let you tweak the concentration, the dosage, and to some extent, so just be aware that lower doses are slower to act, higher doses are faster. So the sweet spot is somewhere in between, where you have a good speed and no or limited repellency. Okay. So this is a study that I did on fire ants, and you can see that some of the nerve toxins like indoxacarb and even like the energy disruptors worked really fast after each vertical line, which is a treatment. And the blue line shows extinguish, which is like an IGR. So as you can see, IGR never produce like absolute zeros, but it provided a really nice steady control over the whole year period. So that's what I was talking about. And this boric acid, the reason it didn't work is that it settled out and it was a sugar water solution, and so that's why we had more ants in boric acid than control. It was just because the boric acid treatment did not work. Okay. So, and the last thing on porous surfaces. So anytime you apply a concrete brick or stone, it's recommended that you use either wettable powder or something with microencapsulated technology, so you'll maintain a high surface activity. I know that FMC has a proprietary formulation on that, but you don't want to use emulsifiable concentrate EC products, unless they have this microencapsulated technology. Because if they don't have that, most of the material will get absorbed into the substrate, either concrete or brick or stone, and then the treatment is not going to be very effective. So I just wanted to thank you guys again. Thank the host and also you guys.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Taravati. That was a great seminar on ants. Just want to again thank everyone for their attendance, and we will see everyone in the new year. So start of December, but happy New Year to everyone, and we will see you in January.
Happy holidays.